China has constructed the world's most sophisticated system of internet content management.
中国工信部宣布全面清理虚拟私人网络 VPN.
A virtual private network.
VPNs are becoming increasingly popular in the country.
Critics say Apple is enabling China's censorship of the internet.
Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. Here are some of the media stories we're covering this week. VPN users in Russia and China are being cut off at the pass. The Kremlin and Beijing stand in the way. We look at the state of journalism in Uganda and the laws that make the job more difficult. More talk from the Israeli government on its threat to shut down Al Jazeera. And it's silly season in the news business.
Just bear in mind it is August.
Sometimes there's just no hiding it. We're going to dig a little deeper now into a story that we just touched on last week. Legislation in both China and Russia that has made masking who you are online, where you are, in order to have better access to news and information much more difficult. Those in search of websites and services their governments don't want them to find have had one reliable tool to help them hide their digital footprint: VPNs, virtual private networks. Up until now, China has taken a selective approach to prohibiting the use of VPNs, usually choosing to look away when people tunneled their way through the great firewall Beijing has put in place to regulate access to the internet. China's new approach to bar access to VPNs requires the support of U.S.-based companies like Apple, which has obeyed an order from Beijing to remove VPN apps from its Chinese app store. Russia has had a more open internet than China's, but it's just passed a new law targeting VPNs and other proxy servers. The justification offered by the Kremlin that it's doing this to stop the promotion of extremist content online hasn't fooled anybody. In both countries, the pattern is unmistakable. The powers that be are out to limit and, in effect, decide what you can or cannot see and do online. Our starting point this week is Beijing.
To make it easy to explain what a VPN is, it's really just a secure tunnel to the internet.
So you can sit in China and you can use a VPN based in Sweden, and you will see everything that the Swedish internet sees because it will look as if you are coming from Sweden.
And now if that channel is cut off, does it mean that people inside China will get cut off from information around the world?
Then it is getting elevated to warfare. This cat and mouse game is getting increasingly sophisticated.
I'm afraid the cat is getting the upper hand.
Make that cats. Russia and China have chosen different ways to police and restrict the use of VPNs. The Russians have flat out banned them and all proxy servers through a new law that takes effect November 1st. China changed its law this past January, requiring developers to get government licenses if they want their VPN apps to remain available on the Chinese market. Beijing's approach is more subtle than the Kremlin's, partly because it already has tools at its disposal that Russia does not.
The way that Russia regulates the internet is in some ways very different from the way that China regulates the internet. China's regulations are backed by a very complicated Great Firewall of China. And so they take a lot of very advanced technical measures to block things in transit. Russia, on the other hand, has only extremely primitive internet censorship technology.
Russia's approach is different. Not necessarily because Russia doesn't want to follow this kind of censorship at the level of the infrastructure, but because it can't. The kind of infrastructure and mechanisms that have been built up in China over 20 years, it's a long-standing project, because of course this is an arms race.
Apple became a key component in this story when it announced on August 1st that it was pulling the plug on the VPN apps it offers its customers in China. Apple was an easy target for Beijing because the company does not allow for open-source app development. Users who want apps for their Apple products must shop for them at the company's App Store, unlike Android phones, which allow their users to acquire apps from anywhere. Apple's closed shop offers the company more control, but it also makes Apple easier for authoritarian governments to control. It's one-stop shopping for both private users and state censors.
Because there is only one Apple store, whereas there are over 400 Android stores in China. And so getting every single one of them to take down every single VPN application is a much, much harder task. It is extremely easy to carry out censorship in the App Store simply by leaning on one company. Apple has made it extremely simple for them to do so.
Apple is not the first internet company that give in to China's demands and controls. It follows a list of many companies. China is a big market. The report just came out a couple of days ago that Chinese internet users now numbered more than 700 million. That is more than the total population of Europe. So can you give up their market?
Apple's market share in China is very important to them. And I would caution Apple that in China, you know, they're trying to build their own internet services and their own smartphones. So they may have market share today, but Apple may be pushed out and wish they would have fought for that principle when they look back.
Apple is acutely aware of the price Western tech companies pay for riling Beijing. Twitter and Facebook were both legal in China until 2009, before butting heads with the authorities over censorship and getting banned. Twitter has effectively been replaced by Sino Weibo, a microblogging service that cooperates with censors. Still, a source at Twitter reportedly told a tech site last year that despite the ban, it still had 10 million users in China, accessing Twitter via VPNs. Those users could well become casualties of the new VPN policy, and they won't be the only ones.
I actually worry about other avenues which are getting stifled by banning or blocking of VPNs. So academics have been complaining, saying, look, I'm not a terrorist, I'm not even political, I'm not a dissident, I'm not doing anything that's wrong, I'm not trying to access content that's troubling, I just want to look at the latest research in my field. I think the other thing that is really critical is, what about business?
In a globalized world, a business needs the internet. They need communication. China has come a long way. Now it's the second largest economy in the world. Everybody needs access to information. This is not even about politics. But if you let politics trump everything, it could be self-defeating.
Blocking VPNs 100% is an economic problem for them. And there's a struggle going on in China of saying, hey, you know, we want to control the political conversation, but if we do that, we're going to lose economically. How they're going to solve that potentially is they're going to have approved VPNs that only the government controls. So it's about control, I think, in China versus outright blocking.
Technology travels fast. Those out to stop it are seldom far behind. And watching this game of cat and mouse in China are plenty of other governments, copycats, in waiting. Prepare for some of them to do the same.
There are many countries all over the world, including Russia and Iran, that look at China's heavily censored internet as a model for how they would like to go forward. Internet censorship is also extremely common in Turkey, where it is extremely political. There's a lot of censorship of journalists, of political content, and as a result, the use of VPNs in Turkey is routine.
There's a real danger of the draconian control and the bans being exported and being learned by other countries. Think about it. China has money. It has government support. It has a market. They can sell the technology. It can be shared with governments around the world. We should not take our internet freedom for granted. In China, in Hong Kong, United States, and around the world.
On the download now, our viewers on VPN access and the dialing back of internet freedom in China and Russia.
These are technologies that allow people to be anonymous online. It's good for the fight against corruption, it's good for freedom of expression, for freedom of opinion, and for the advancement of society. It's even been determined a human right by the United Nations. And interestingly, both Russia and China voted against that. However, there is still hope because VPNs are largely untraceable. They are encrypted traffic.
Blocking political information and communication is just a sign that the government is afraid of its own citizens. The outlawing of VPN is an indication that we live in a time of heavy political polarization. Such polarization manifests itself in various online forms, such as political hacking, cyber attacks, cyber warfare, online surveillance, and internet censorship. What is needed both in the online and the offline world is not more conflict and more repression, but attempts at the creation of political understanding.
Other media stories that are on our radar this week. It's been a year since the Turkish government declared its state of emergency, and the pressure on journalists has intensified steadily, even on those outside the country. On August 10th, 35 arrest warrants were issued for employees of news outlets said to be affiliated with Fethullah Gulen, the alleged mastermind of last year's failed coup. The arrests were ordered in connection with the use of Bylock, an encrypted messaging app that Turkish prosecutors allege only followers of Gulen use. Hamza Yalcin was arrested at the airport in Barcelona on August 3rd by Spanish authorities on the basis of an international warrant issued by Ankara. A dual citizen of Sweden and Turkey and editor of the online paper Odak Dergisi, Yalcin is accused of organizing acts of terror in 2010. The Swedish Foreign Ministry has provided Yalcin with a lawyer and is trying to arrange a prison visit. The Turkish Journalists Association says 149 media organizations have been closed down and 169 journalists have been jailed since the coup. 2 more journalists were murdered in the Philippines this past week, both on the southern island of Mindanao in separate shootings. Newspaper reporter Leonardo Diaz, who covered local politics, and radio host Rudy Alacawe were both shot dead by men on motorcycles. A week earlier, a former newspaper editor was killed in Manila, and another radio journalist in Mindanao recently survived a shooting. The perpetrators in all the cases remain at large. And if the record of the Philippines on these kinds of killings is any indication, the chance of conviction is slim. According to the New York-based Committee to Protect Journalists, of the 76 murdered in the country since 1992, 68 have been killed with impunity. It's not often that the Israeli government follows the initiative of Arab states to justify its own policies. However, that's the rationale it's offering for its decision to close Al Jazeera's bureau in Jerusalem and take the network off the air in Israel. The decision was announced August 6th by Communications Minister Ayub Kara at a news conference Al Jazeera was banned from attending. Kara said, "We have based our decision on the move by Sunni Arab states to close the Al Jazeera offices." He accused the network of inciting violence. That accusation, which the network denies, comes in the wake of Al Jazeera's continued coverage of clashes that followed Israel's decision last month to restrict Palestinians' access to the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, citing safety concerns.
Oh, we've just seen a punch a Palestinian protester in the face there.
Israel has long taken issue with Al Jazeera's reporting of the occupied territories, but has never taken these kinds of measures. And all this talk may come to nothing, since it would require the passage of legislation. The Israeli Knesset does not reconvene until October, and a lot can happen between now and then, given the corruption investigation into Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, whose wife has already been indicted. Amnesty International, however, called it a brazen attack on media freedom, while the Committee to Protect Journalists added it would put Israel firmly in the camp of some of the region's worst enemies of press freedom. When you talk to journalists in Uganda about the challenges of the work they do, they will tell you about political intimidation, harassment, even bogus criminal charges. However, over the past few years, some things have changed. And now, the people who reporters in Uganda tend to fear the most wear police uniforms. President Yoweri Museveni has held power for 31 years now. In his early days in office, he oversaw the opening up of the country's media space, the arrival of many new news outlets, both broadcast and print. However, the 72-year-old has clearly grown less tolerant of a free press. His government has passed some problematic laws that have had a chilling effect on reporting. The Listening Post's Nick Muirhead now from Kampala on the way those laws are enforced when journalism in Uganda crosses paths with policing.
On the surface, the media in Uganda looks vibrant. Dozens of papers populate the newsstands. There are numerous news channels on TV and some 240 radio stations on the dial. Ugandans can also get online with relative ease. However, speak to journalists here and many will tell you that reporting the news can be risky and a police presence is often not a reassurance, but a threat.
Journalists have been... The female police officers beat us, while the male officers enjoyed fondling our breasts.
This policewoman charged against a female journalist while everyone looked on.
I went to see Andrew Luwanga, a journalist who was assaulted by a senior policeman while covering a protest in 2015, an attack he says has left him with permanent injuries. On January 12, 2015, you went out to cover a group of young Ugandans who were protesting against unemployment in the country. What happened next?
2 leaders of the youth were arrested. I happened to be behind. I was filming the arrest. He saw me. He got his cable. Hit me first. He hit me the second time. The third came in. I put the camera. He hit it. It was so strong, it broke the LCD. The camera was in parts. So he hit me, then I blacked out.
Once attacked, of course, was rushed to hospital. Though he was briefly arrested by the police and they wanted to put him in the cells in that state of health, in very deteriorating state. We went to the hospital to ask the medical team at the hospital, our national referral hospital, to give due attention to this guy. But then the guy was discharged and in a very pathetic health state. And the next day when he came over to the police to record a statement, he collapsed.
I was admitted in Zambia hospital, but I woke up after 3 or 4 days. On waking up on the 4th day, I could not feel myself. I could not feel from the waist up to the legs. I could not stand. I was in Zambia for about 27 days.
The day after the assault, a group of Ugandan journalists and media activists organized a protest march. As they neared police headquarters in central Kampala, they were blocked by police, pepper sprayed and arrested. Overwhelming evidence of the assault on Luwanga by District Police Commander Jerome Musije got him suspended and charged. 2 years later, in a case fraught with delays, irregularities and claims of witness intimidation, Musije was found guilty of assault. He was dismissed from the force and fined a nominal $1,400 US. Luwanga says that his medical bills have come in at around $60,000. We spoke with Asan Kasinja, the Assistant Inspector General of Police. He says that his force has taken the appropriate action, even if the courts have not.
Let's contextualize this very well. This officer was arrested by the police. The DPP advised the police on which charges to charge him, and he was taken to courts. So if courts of law gave a punishment that, in public opinion, it's not what he could have done, we have nothing to do about that. That was not the police. And we should not be judged for what courts of law, in their wisdom, did. But for us, we said, even if courts of law have made this kind of judgment, this officer cannot work in the police.
We wanted a message to go out to the other police officers and security agents who have since made it a habit to descend onto journalists, beat them, block them from accessing news. We wanted to just make that point very strong. We didn't achieve that.
And it's not the only case. Why we are referring to it is because he was courageous enough to go to court. But there are so many journalists that have been beaten out of police brutality, beating, kicking. And the police is not just beating journalists. They are beating citizens.
Musije is one of the only police officers to have been convicted of assaulting a journalist, despite the alarming frequency with which it happens. According to a report released by the Human Rights Network for Journalists in Uganda, the HRNJU, the security forces, especially the police, are the worst offenders against media freedoms. Of the 135 violations against journalists last year, 83 were committed by the Ugandan police. That's more than 60%. The police have consistently been the worst perpetrators of violence against the media in Uganda. What the HRNJU's findings shows that over the past 4 years there's been a spike in police aggression, and that should come as no surprise because exactly 4 years ago a controversial new law was passed called the Public Order Management Act that many here warned would put the opposition, activists, protesters and journalists on a collision course with the authorities. The roots of the Public Order Management Act, or POMA, can be traced back to 2011. As the Arab Spring unfolded with uprisings across the Middle East and North Africa, authorities in Kampala made moves to bolster legislation that would ostensibly help them maintain order. In practice, it would seem they were creating a legal framework to crack down on dissent. Under POMA, if 5 or more Ugandans want to form any kind of political assembly, then they need police permission to do so, which opposition members will tell you is hard to come by. As a consequence, police are breaking up more and more gatherings of a political nature, like a handful of Ugandan youths protesting against unemployment. And when journalists turn up to cover the story, then all too often, and through no choice of their own, they become part of the story.
We know the spirit behind the particular law was to phase out critical voices, was to deny space to the opposition and all critical minds. Here in Uganda, the media is the last man standing to give a platform to those that are not allowed to assemble, to associate and to express themselves through public forums and meetings, which media now is being arm-twisted to discuss things in a particular way that tends to be friendly to the regime.
They've always stopped opposition, they've always beaten media, they've always beaten people, citizens who are standing up for their rights, but they had no legal basis. So the Public Order Management Act was passed to create a basis for the bad acts of government. But also it's important to underscore the fact that POMA is being implemented alongside other draconian laws. The Communications Act, the Media Freedoms Act, the Cyber Crimes Act. So it is not just POMA that is used.
The media, journalists have already determined, for example, if it is a political contestation, they are already biased. You can tell whether it is at a rally, whether it is by writing, whether it is expressing a point on TV. And once you have, or the police think that you are somebody from that kind of perspective, there is going to be a problem.
That a perceived media bias forms any kind of justification for police brutality is the problem. And it demonstrates that too many uniforms in Uganda are there to serve those in power and not the people. And here is just one outcome. Andrew Luwanga is now forced to live at home with his retired mother. The journalist struggles to make ends meet and is unlikely to work in the field, if not the profession, ever again. The policeman who assaulted him has walked free.
Finally, it's August, which for most of the Northern Hemisphere means the height of summer. Those in the news business call this the silly season. A lot of newsmakers have already hit the beach. Legislatures and parliaments have shut down for their summer recess, which adds up to a lot of slow news days. But 24-hour news channels still have all that time to fill, which means that stories that would not normally make the cut end up on the air. Stories about surfing dogs, for instance. When a BBC News anchor, Simon McCoy, saw the dog story come up on his auto cue this past week, he was not amused, and he made sure that the audience knew it. We'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.
Now, you're watching BBC News. Just bear in mind it is August. This does not look like a walk in the park. Dog owners and their pets in California have hit the waves in the second annual World Dog Surfing Championships. Here are the pictures.
There's also style, there's confidence, there's the size of the wave, because some events have really big waves, some have very small waves. There's a lot of style and techniques. It's really interesting.
The competitors' main challenge is to stay afloat on the board. This is in Pacifica near San Francisco, but there are also prizes for the best dressed and tandem surfing dogs. The winner, of course, being crowned top dog. That's a shame. We've run out of pictures. The weather. Let's get the latest. On the other side of the newsroom, Ben Rich can get us out of that one. Ben.
That's the best thing I've ever seen, Simon. They give you all the biggest stories, don't they?